Smoke hung low like a silent accusation, curling upward from the blackened remains of what once stood proud, a family legacy reduced to ashes and embers. Fire crackled defiantly, devouring memories and hope alike, as silhouettes moved against the glowing horizon, their shadows ominous in the flickering flames. This land, forged by calloused hands and stubborn dreams, now bore scars of betrayal. A single farmer stood at the edge of ruin, fists clenched, eyes burning brighter than any blaze, determined not just to salvage what remained, but to unearth the truth hidden beneath the ashes. No one had warned him that kindness would invite treachery, or that trust could spark a war. But tonight, beneath the endless stretch of stars, one thing was certain: reckoning was coming, and someone would answer for the flames. Nathaniel Nate Hayes stood at the edge of his family's farmland, the fading sun glinting on the dusty remnants of once verdant fields. At 52, Nate carried his years in the deep creases around his eyes and the stiff ache in his back from decades of labor. His wife had passed away 5 years ago, leaving him with a daughter, Jamie, who was now away at college, unaware of just how dire things had become at home. Ever since the most recent drought took hold, the farm, a legacy passed down through 3 generations, was on the brink of foreclosure. Nate had done everything he could cut back on personal expenses, taken out loan extensions, but it was never enough. And tonight, as he ran his calloused fingers through the parched dirt, he felt a terrible hollowness in his chest, a dread that he was about to become the man who finally lost what his father and grandfather had fought so hard to preserve. Standing there, Nate recalled better times, a long ago summer when his wife, Diana, was still alive, and the two of them would slow dance on the porch by the light of the harvest moon. He remembered Jamie giggling as she chased fireflies through these very rows, promising her mother that someday she would be a scientist who fixed the world's problems. Now, his only child was hundreds of miles away, thriving in a university environment that Nate could barely afford to support. He kept telling himself he'd find a way through, that this year's harvest would turn around somehow. But with the irrigation pump broken yet again, and no funds left to repair it, hope was thinning like the topsoil after a windstorm. Desperate for a moment of reprieve, he turned toward the battered pickup truck parked near the barn. The sun's last rays revealed a chipped windshield and dull paint, an apt reflection of the entire operation's neglected state. On the passenger seat lay a stack of bills he'd picked up from the mailbox earlier that evening, their bold red final notice stamps mocking him. Reluctantly, he trudged back to the farmhouse, a 2-story structure whose peeling paint and sagging porch told stories of maintenance deferred. Inside, the kitchen was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. Nate sank into a chair at the table piled high with letters from the bank, overdue invoices from the seed supplier, and an ominous letter warning that the utility might cut his electricity if the bill wasn't paid by month's end. Through the window, he glimpsed the rusted silhouette of the old irrigation pipes that had once brought life-giving water to his fields. The memory of bountiful harvests clashed painfully with the current, stark reality. He thought about calling Jamie to tell her everything. Yet each time the notion arose, he pushed it aside. She'd worked so hard to earn her scholarship, and he refused to burden her with his failures. After all, he told himself, any father worth his salt would handle this kind of crisis alone. But as the night thickened, a nauseating sense of finality settled over him. He checked the locks, flicked off the single bulb, and climbed the creaking stairs to his bedroom. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call the bank again and beg for just a little more time. One more week, one more month, maybe something, anything, might change. He had no way of knowing that destiny would arrive much sooner, in the form of a stranger who'd soon knock on his door asking for a simple favor, the use of some old tools he kept in the shed. The next morning, Nate awoke to the gray pre-dawn light filtering through threadbare curtains. He made himself a black coffee, no cream, no sugar, because he'd given up such luxuries months ago and strolled out to the porch, bracing for another day of gloom and worry. Instead, he found the unexpected. A beat-up SUV was rolling up his long dirt driveway, its tires stirring up little puffs of dust. Nate set his coffee mug down slowly. Visitors were rare, and most of the time, they were debt collectors or bank representatives who never brought good news. As the vehicle drew closer, he noticed it was an older model, with dents on the fender and a mismatched passenger door. It finally came to a halt near his mailbox, and the driver stepped out, a petite woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed in worn jeans and hiking boots. She stood by the car for a moment, scanning the landscape. Even from a distance, Nate saw an air of confidence in her stance, the way she rested one hand on the hood, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. When she finally made her way toward the porch, Nate was ready with a cautious greeting. "Morning. Can I help you?" he asked, slipping his hands into his front pockets, more out of defensiveness than nonchalance. "Hi there," the woman replied, pushing a few stray strands of black hair out of her face. "My name's Dr. Ava Mori. I'm sorry to bother you, but my SUV's been making some strange noises, and I was hoping you might have a few tools I could borrow just to check under the hood." The words were simple enough, but something about her, from the formal doctor title to her calm demeanor, put Nate on alert. Even so, he wasn't the sort to turn away a stranger in need, especially one asking for help in such a direct manner. "I've got a toolbox in the shed," he said, nodding toward a small outbuilding near the barn. "You're welcome to take a look." Relief flooded Ava's face. "Thank you, I really appreciate it. Honestly, I'm not sure what's leaking, but it's definitely not good." She followed him across the yard, noting the bare patches of ground and the skeletons of irrigation piping. "This your place?" she asked casually. "It is," Nate said, his tone clipped. He opened the shed door, exposing a neat collection of tools hung on pegboards, each labeled with permanent marker. A wave of nostalgia washed over him. Some of these belonged to his father and grandfather. "Here," he said, handing Ava a well-worn toolbox. She took it with surprising reverence, as if aware of its sentimental value. "I promise I'll return everything just as I found it," she said, meeting his gaze. He noticed for the first time flecks of green in her eyes and something behind them intelligence. Certainly, but also urgency. "Well," he replied, trying to keep the corners of his mouth from curving up, "I'm not going anywhere anyway." He gestured to the farm around them with a humorless shrug. "Feel free to fix your SUV. If you need something else, just holler." Ava nodded. "Thanks again. I'll try not to be a nuisance." Nate watched her stride back toward the SUV, his toolbox in hand. He found it odd that she seemed neither distressed nor hurried about her vehicle troubles. Something about the entire situation unsettled him, though he couldn't pinpoint what. But he had no time to dwell on it. Another day of dead-end tasks awaited things that ultimately wouldn't save the farm unless he found a miracle. Little did he know, that miracle was already here. A couple of hours later, Nate returned from the barn where he'd been attempting to tinker with his broken irrigation pump again to see Ava standing by his front porch. This time, no pretense of engine trouble lingered. The hood of her SUV was shut, and his toolbox was neatly placed on the porch steps. As he approached, she seemed to gather herself, like someone about to confess a secret. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice holding a faint tremor. "There's actually nothing wrong with my car. I, staged that breakdown. I've been trying to find a farm where I could demonstrate a system I've been working on. But every time I approach farmers openly, they slam the door in my face." She shifted her weight, as if preparing for a hostile reaction. Nate's eyebrows shot up. He wasn't sure whether to be angry, curious, or both. "You're telling me you lied so you could snoop around my property?" "Let me explain." Ava raised her hands, palms outward, in a calming gesture. "I'm an agricultural engineer. I used to work for a major ag tech corporation called TerraGrow. I developed a prototype irrigation system that uses sensors, machine learning algorithms, and ultra-efficient water delivery. Long story short, TerraGrow tried to bury my design, so I walked out. Now I'm on my own, trying to get real-world data to prove this system works. But most farmers are either too tied up in debt with larger companies or too skeptical. So I took a different approach." She exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry I deceived you." Nate inhaled a lungful of dusty air. letting his gaze drift over his scraggly fields. TerraGrow was a name he knew all too well. They financed big, industrial-scale farms, lobbied for state water rights, and undercut local cooperatives. "So you want to use my land as a guinea pig?" he asked, suspicion edging his tone. "Yes, but not in a way that hurts you," Ava said, a little too quickly. "I have grant money enough to install the system free of charge. What I need is a real farm, with real problems, to show how this technology can transform water usage. I've seen your fields. You're suffering from drought. This could help, if you'll let me try." She hesitated, then he pulled a small, rectangular device from her jacket. "This is a soil sensor. I left one in your shed last night just to test the dryness. I can show you the data if you want." His distrust flared. "Tested my soil without permission." Ava winced. "I know that sounds bad, but I had to see if the conditions were right. And, well, now they are. Your soil is bone dry, especially deeper down. Honestly, if we don't get water into those roots soon, your cornfields won't make it another month." Nate folded his arms, the reality of his predicament colliding with his pride. He glanced at the farmhouse, remembering the bank letters and the looming threat of losing it all. "Let's say I believe you. Why would you choose a small farm like mine over some bigger operation that can do large-scale tests?" Ava's gaze softened. "Because big operations have big investors and can buy whatever system is on the market. You can't. You stand to lose everything if you don't adapt. To me, you're exactly the farmer this tech was meant to help." He let her words hang in the hot morning air. A part of him screamed to show her the door, to cling to his pride. But the more rational part, the one that ached for a lifeline, told him he'd be a fool to dismiss the one real solution that had come knocking. Nate decided he needed to think this through carefully, so he invited Ava inside for a glass of water. Ironic, he mused, given the water shortage advantage that plagued his fields. The kitchen was cluttered, mostly with mail and overdue notices, but it was the closest thing he had to a meeting space. Ava settled into a chair and opened a sleek tablet, quickly tapping through screens of data, colorful graphs, and diagrams. "Here's what the system looks like," she said, showing him an image of a network of tubes snaking through rows of crops, all connected to a small hub. The soil sensors go into the ground at various depths. They monitor moisture levels, salinity, temperature. That data feeds into my software, which decides how much water each section of the field needs and when. No guesswork. Nate studied the diagram. He was no stranger to irrigation setups. He'd spent years wrestling with pivot systems, drip hoses, you name it, but this seemed next level. "And you're saying you'll install this at no cost to me?" he asked, still skeptical. "What's in it for you?" Ava inhaled, then exhaled, as if struggling with how much to reveal. "I need a proof of concept to show potential backers, people who might help me scale this up and make it affordable for farmers. Otherwise, TerraGrow and other corporations will dominate the market. Eventually, they'll release their own watered-down version of this tech and charge sky-high licensing fees. Family farms won't stand a chance." He noticed the bitterness creeping into her voice when she mentioned TerraGrow. "So this is personal," Nate said quietly. "They took something from you." "You could say that," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "I had a contract that basically let them own any intellectual property I created while under their employment. But I'd been working on this concept long before I joined them. They exploited a loophole. I decided I couldn't let them bury my system just because they saw it as a threat to their existing product lines." He let the implications sink in. Trusting a renegade engineer with big claims was risky, but if she was legitimate, her project could be his salvation. If she was lying, though, he'd be out whatever time and labor he invested, time he could ill afford with a foreclosure clock. Clock ticking. Finally, he asked, "So what happens if we do this and it doesn't work?" Ava squared her shoulders. "Then you walk away. No strings attached. I'll even pay to remove the equipment if that's what you want. But I'm confident this will help. Your farm could be the pilot case that proves small operations can thrive with next-gen irrigation." Nate stared at her tablet's screen. the vibrant green bars showcasing a hypothetical yield increase if the system performed as predicted. It was hard not to feel a surge of hope, something he hadn't felt in far too long. He pictured Jamie, away at college, maybe returning to a farm that was away instead of condemned. His gaze flicked to Ava. There was conviction in her eyes, not just desperation or salesmanship, but a genuine belief in what she was doing. The risk felt immense, but so was the risk of doing nothing. "All right," he said at last, his voice echoing in the stillness of the kitchen. "I'll give you a chance, but if I smell anything fishy, if it looks like you're scamming me, that's the end of it." Her face lit up with relief. "That's all I asked, for a chance." By the next week, Ava had moved a small trailer onto Nate's property, a makeshift mobile lab stocked with sensors, cables, and testing equipment. Nate watched, half fascinated and half wary, as she meticulously plotted out where each sensor should go. She carried an array of small, cylindrical probes, some measuring just a few inches, others nearly a foot long, that she inserted into pre-dug holes around the farm. Each sensor linked wirelessly to a central hub, a device about the size of a shoebox that was set up in Nate's old barn. "Once everything's in place, the system calibrates itself," she explained. "You'll see, we'll know exactly where the dry patches are, how the root zones are faring, and even if there's a risk of fungal growth in the soil." It sounded almost too good to be true. Nate recalled the times he'd walked these fields, reliant solely on the feel of the dirt in his hand and the look of the leaves to gauge moisture. He respected tradition, his father had taught him well, but he also couldn't deny that his father's methods hadn't prevented the current crisis. Maybe, just maybe, technology had something to offer that raw intuition couldn't. Still, not everyone was thrilled. Bill Anderson, Nate's closest neighbor, drove up in his pickup, stepping out in worn overalls and a skeptical glare. "Nate, you finally lost it," Bill asked, eyeing the tangle of tubes and wires as Ava helped run cables to the barn. "All that fancy gadgetry's just extra cost. Might as well burn your money." Nate bristled but tried to sound calm. "She's installing this at no cost to me. Bill, I'm just giving it a shot." "Nothing's ever free," Bill muttered. He turned to Ava and grunted. "You the brains behind this contraption?" She nodded politely. "I'm Dr. Ava Mori. I promise I'm not here to scam anyone, just trying to prove a system can help farmers conserve water and boost yields." Bill fixed her with a long stare. "I've been on this land 50 years. There's no magic solution for a drought." He then turned his gaze back to Nate. "You keep me posted. Here, if this doesn't pan out, there are still folks in town who might buy your property before the bank gobbles it up. Maybe you can get a decent price." The man's bluntness stung, but Nate forced a thin smile. "Sure thing. Bill, I'll keep you updated." After Bill left, Ava let out a low whistle. "Friendly bunch around here." Nate gave a half shrug. "They're realists. Everyone's hurting. And they're all suspicious of new technology, especially if it comes out of nowhere." As they resumed working, Ava's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at the screen and her brow furrowed. Though she quickly slipped the device back into her pocket, Nate made a mental note of her sudden tension. Had to be something about TerraGrow, he guessed, but he didn't push. It wasn't his style to pry. The rest of the day passed with surprising efficiency. By sundown, the sensors were placed, the hub was online, and a labyrinth of drip lines was being laid out to replace Nate's defunct overhead sprinklers. Despite the long hours, Ava seemed tireless. She wore a faint smile throughout, as if the backbreaking labor was a small price to pay for seeing her vision come to life. Nate found himself infected by a flicker of optimism too. For the first time in months, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't end in disaster. That night, after Ava retired to her trailer, Nate was alone in the house with his thoughts. Rain had been promised by local forecasts for weeks, but the sky remained clear. The dryness of the air pressed in on him, intensifying his worry. Before turning in, he allowed himself a moment to reflect on the day's progress. The labyrinth of tubes now stretched across several acres. a stark contrast to the rusted, broken pipes he'd once relied upon. He remembered Bill's warning, "Nothing's ever free." The truth was, even if the equipment cost him nothing up front, his time, labor, and the risk to his remaining crops were all on the line. If Ava's system flopped, he wouldn't just be back to square one, he'd be months behind. It might tip him over the edge with the bank. Nonetheless, he couldn't help feeling a stirring of anticipation at the thought of controlling the irrigation from the barn hub. He pictured himself checking a digital interface, seeing exactly how much water each plant was getting. No guesswork, no Hail Mary prayers for rain. A small part of him even felt a pang of excitement, like a child with a new toy. Before heading upstairs, he found himself dialing Jamie's number. It rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice cheerful. She asked how things were at the farm, and for a moment he was tempted to spill everything about Ava, the new system, how precariously close they were to losing everything. But Jamie was in the midst of finals, and he couldn't bear to put more stress on her. So he swallowed the lump in his throat and said, "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just the usual chores." When he hung up, guilt gnawed at him. He'd always been honest with his daughter, teaching her to face challenges head on. Now he was withholding the biggest crisis of his life. But he rationalized that this was for her own good. She needed to focus on her future, not be dragged down by his problems. The next morning, the house phone woke him before dawn, expecting the bank or some other unpleasantness. He nearly hesitated to answer, but the voice on the other end was soft-spoken, a representative from a local agricultural co-op verifying a rumor he'd heard about strange new gear installed on the Hayes farm. Nate explained, in vague terms, that he was testing a new irrigation system. The co-op rep sounded intrigued, possibly hopeful. It struck Nate that if this system really did work, it could spark bigger changes than just saving his own farm. He felt a faint tremor of possibility. Once upon a time, he had big dreams expanding the farm, maybe even launching a local brand of organic produce. Could those dreams still be revived? Determined to see whether Ava's system actually performed, he pulled on his boots and headed outside. The early light revealed a thin haze rising from the fields, and when he opened the barn door, the new control hub glowed softly. Ava was already there, tapping away at her tablet. She looked up and smiled. "Ready to see something cool?" she asked, gesturing for him to come closer. "These are the live readings from the sensors we installed. Looks like there's still a lot of dryness around Zone 3, but we're pushing water directly to those roots now. We should see a difference within a few days." Nate peered at the data. Despite his skepticism, a flicker of hope caught hold of him. Maybe this Hail Mary pass would finally break his losing streak. Ava's system quickly became a point of fascination for Nate. Over the next week, he found himself sneaking into the barn at odd hours, flipping on the monitors to watch as moisture readings ticked slightly higher day by day. At first, the changes were marginal, almost imperceptible. But soon, sections of the field that had been on the brink of total devastation began showing signs of revival, slight greening at the base of the stalks, leaves that drooped less under the scorching sun. Meanwhile, Ava documented everything. She snapped photos of the fields, recorded exact water usage figures, and meticulously logged soil sensor data. Every evening, they'd review the day's progress. It was an oddly companionable routine, both of them leaning over a makeshift desk in the barn, heads close together as they scrolled through spreadsheets. One evening, Nate mustered the nerve to ask about her past. The question came out haltingly as they stood side by side, watching the digital readouts shift in real time. "So, Terragro, you said you used to work there. How did it end?" Ava hesitated. He could see the conflict in her eyes. Then she sighed. "I was naive. I believed the company wanted to revolutionize farming with sustainable technology. But the deeper I got into corporate politics, the clearer it became that profits were the top priority, not helping small farms. I presented this irrigation design to my division head, thinking I'd found the perfect solution to water scarcity. They told me it was too risky, too expensive to develop. They wanted guaranteed returns, not gradual transformations. She crossed her arms, eyes distant. Worse, they attempted to patent a watered-down version of my design under their name, something that wouldn't actually help small farmers, but would still rake in money from big agricultural sites. When I fought them on it, they threatened to terminate my contract. So I quit, but not before I made sure to keep the real schematics safe. Nate processed this, feeling a mixture of admiration and fear. You took a big risk, walking out on them like that, especially if they're the litigious type. Ava let out a short laugh. They definitely are, but I've been careful. And if I can just prove to potential investors that this works on a small scale, it'll overshadow whatever TerraGrow tries to launch. That's why I had to find a place like yours to demonstrate tangible results, enough to attract the right kind of support. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call on Ava's cell. She glanced at it, muttered an apology, and stepped outside. Nate heard the tension in her voice even though she kept it low. He wondered if TerraGrow was already sniffing around, or if it was some investor pressing for updates. When she returned, her face was shuttered. Her earlier openness, everything okay, he asked carefully. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just some logistics I need to handle. Don't worry about it. Nate let it drop, but a seed of concern lodged in his mind. Maybe Bill was right, nothing came free, and trouble often followed big promises. Yet as they finished reviewing the day's sensor data, he looked at the rows of healthy corn stalks glowing on the screen. They were living proof that, for once, he might have more to gain than to lose. As word spread around the county about Nate's newfangled irrigation system, reactions varied. Some farmers dismissed it as a passing fad, while others, desperate under the same drought conditions, came by to poke around. Bill Anderson's cynicism turned to guarded curiosity after a drive-by inspection revealed that, indeed, Nate's fields looked greener than his. A few locals whispered that maybe Nate had secretly won the lottery or struck a deal with shady financiers. Regardless of gossip, the shift in the fields was undeniable. Plants that had been close to wilting now held themselves upright. The central hub in the barn showed water consumption at roughly half of what Nate had been using with his old, broken-down sprinklers. Each day, more people started appearing unannounced, hoping to get a glimpse of the technology. Ava handled most of the technical explanations, letting Nate be the farmer liaison, someone the others trusted more than an outsider with fancy credentials. One sweltering afternoon, an aging reporter from the local newspaper showed up, pen and notepad in hand. She interviewed Nate, asked about the pitch and the young lady who'd introduced the system. Nate tried to downplay it as best he could, insisting it was just an experiment. Yet the reporter seemed enthralled by the concept of a high-tech irrigation solution, saving a centuries-old farm. She snapped a few photos and promised to run a story in the next edition. After she left, Ava caught Nate's eye. "You okay with all this attention?" she asked. "We wanted data, not a media circus." He shrugged. "I'd rather not be the county's biggest spectacle, but if it helps get the word out and maybe secures you some legit backing, then it might be worth it. I just hope it doesn't attract the wrong kind of attention." As if on cue, a black SUV rumbled up the driveway the next morning. Nate felt a jolt of alarm. It was nothing like Ava's beat-up vehicle. This one gleamed with tinted windows and out-of-state plates. Two men in expensive suits stepped out, surveyed the farm with practiced indifference, then approached. "Mr. Hayes," one said, flashing a corporate ID. "Name's Mark Leland. We represent TerraGrow. We've been hearing interesting stories about your irrigation setup. We'd love to discuss potential partnerships." Nate's stomach tightened at the mention of TerraGrow. He glanced over his shoulder to see Ava emerging from the barn, eyes narrowing as she recognized them. "I'm not sure I'm looking for a partnership," he said coolly. Mark Leland offered a patronizing smile. "I think you'll want to hear us out. After all, this technology might infringe on certain patents we hold. We're willing to talk amicably now rather than file claims." Ava stepped forward, face set. "Those patents are mine. TerraGrow refused to develop them, so I exercise my right to innovate on my own time. The second man, stockier and older, gave a mirthless laugh. Is that so, Dr. Mori? Our legal team might disagree. Tension crackled in the dusty air. Nate felt anger rising, along with a protective urge he hadn't felt in years. This was his farm, his livelihood, and they had no right barging in with threats. You two need to leave, he managed, voice steady. Unless you have a court order, I'm asking you politely, get off my property. Mark Leland adjusted his tie, clearly unmoved. We'll leave, but consider this a courtesy call. We'd hate for you to invest all this time in a system that you can't legally market. Think it over. We'll be in touch. As they left, dust billowing behind them, Ava and Nate exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The storm they'd both feared was now on their doorstep. And it wasn't just about water or seeds anymore. It was about ownership, control, and the very survival of the small farms TerraGrow sought to dominate. After the men from TerraGrow departed, Ava sat on the barn steps, her hands trembling slightly. Nate joined her, resting a cautious hand on her shoulder. They can't just come in here and claim everything's theirs. Can they? He asked. Despite his bravado, the notion of a massive corporation tying them up in legal battles was terrifying. Ava inhaled deeply. I have notes, designs, prototypes predating my time at TerraGrow. The problem is they have an army of lawyers who'll drag out any dispute. They won't just vanish because we told them to leave. She paused, as though weighing how much to divulge. They might also try scare tactics buying local officials, threatening licensing issues. Who knows? But I'm not backing down. Nate admired her resolve, even as he worried it could lead them into a deeper mess. Well, he said, forcing a tight grin, we've come too far to stop now. And it's not like I have anything left to lose. The bank's already breathing down my neck. Word of TerraGrow's visit spread around the county within days. Bill Anderson showed up to the farm again, frowning more than usual. Heard you got corporate visitors, he said, spitting a wad of tobacco into the dirt. You opening the door to them big boys now. No, Nate snapped, then tried to soften his tone. They came uninvited. We sent them packing. Bill's gaze flicked to the tangle of drip lines in the field, where a gentle trickle of water kept the soil damp. Gotta say, your corn is looking a hell of a lot better than mine. Might be time I asked Dr. Mori if she's got a system for me, too. Nate blinked in surprise, realizing Bill's skepticism was melting away. She's open to helping more farmers, Bill. But TerraGrow's not gonna like that. Bill shrugged in that fatalistic way older farmers often do. They already got their claws in half the land around here, finance-wise. Maybe it's time we stood up. If your results keep up, folks are gonna want in. When Bill left, Nate found Ava in the barn, crouched over the central hub. She was calibrating some of the sensors, her expression absent-minded as if her thoughts were elsewhere. I think Bill wants to sign up, Nate said, leaning against the wall. Might be the start of something. Ava nodded, though her brow furrowed. We're not just playing with water now. This is about challenging how a huge industry operates. Once more, farmers realize we can reduce costs and save their crops. TerraGrow's business model is in jeopardy, which means they'll fight back harder. Nate winced at the thought of litigation, intimidation, maybe even sabotage. What do we do? She sat back, crossing her arms over her knees. We keep going, gather evidence of success, get local media on our side, maybe even the state government. The more public support we have, the harder it'll be for TerraGrow to crush us in secret. He nodded, a surge of determination coursing through him. He thought of Jamie, how proud she'd be if he not only saved the farm, but also pioneered a new era of sustainable agriculture for the community. Then let's make it big, he said. Let's show the whole county what this can do. Ava smiled, some of the tension lifting from her face. Deal. That night, they began drafting a plan, inviting neighbors to weekly presentations, organizing a small open house, even contacting a local university extension agent. If TerraGrow wanted a quiet takeover, they'd have to do it in the public eye now, and that might be the best defense they had. before they could move forward with a public demonstration. However, the unthinkable happened. One evening, as Nate finished locking up the barn, he noticed a faint glow out by the equipment shed. At first, he thought it might be Ava working late, but she was in the farmhouse, reviewing data. Suspicious. He crept closer, and the smell of smoke reached his nostrils before he spotted the flickering flames. Someone had set fire to a pile of old crates stacked near the outer wall of the shed. The flames licked up the dry wood, threatening to spread to the structure itself, the same shed that housed spare hoses, fertilizer, and an extra generator. Heart pounding, Nate ran back to the farmhouse, yelling for Ava to call the fire department. Then, he grabbed 2 large buckets, filled them from a rain barrel, and dashed back to the inferno. Adrenaline surged, and he doused the flames as best he could. Those small fires kept flaring up, fueled by the dryness of the night air. Eva arrived breathless, hauling a garden hose from the barn spigot. Together, they fought the flames, choking on the smoke. It felt like an eternity, but they managed to prevent the fire from overtaking the entire shed. By the time the volunteer firefighters showed up, the blaze had mostly been contained, though the shed's wall was charred and some equipment inside was damaged. As the firefighters packed up, they asked the usual questions. Had anyone seen suspicious activity? Did they store flammable chemicals? Nate could only shake his head. We keep a small supply of fertilizer, but nothing that ignites like that. The leading firefighter, an older man Nate recognized from around town, offered a grim nod. Looks like arson to me. Keep an eye out. In the aftermath, Ava paced the yard, face pale with anger and fear. This can't be a coincidence, she said, voice trembling. Terragro comes sniffing around, and days later someone tries to burn down part of your farm. Nate sat heavily on an overturned barrel, feeling the weight of exhaustion. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but who else would benefit from scaring us? My neighbors might resent me, but they're not criminals. This has corporate intimidation written all over it. Ava's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, more focused on the smoldering remains of the shed. We should file a police report, she said, her tone resolute. If Terragro is behind this, we need a record of every threat, every suspicious act. He nodded, numb. In the morning, right now, I just want to make sure nothing else is going to catch fire. They spent the next hour patrolling the perimeter, armed with flashlights and the lingering smell of smoke. Shadows cast by the dying moonlight seemed to leap in every corner, making both of them jump at the slightest noise. Eventually, they settled back at the farmhouse. Ava rummaged through her trailer lab to confirm her sensor prototypes were safe. Nate made coffee, even though it was well past midnight, because the adrenaline and fear wouldn't let him sleep. They said little, but the unspoken question weighed on them both. How far would Terragro, or whoever was behind this, go to protect their interests? By the time dawn broke, the sooty evidence of the fire was all too visible. Nate felt something shift inside him, a steely resolve. If they were willing to go this far, then the threat was real. And if they were prepared to play dirty, maybe it was time he and Ava went all in, shining as bright a spotlight as possible on what they were doing. That might be the only true protection they had. True to their new plan, Nate and Ava went on the offensive. They contacted the local newspaper to report the arson attempt and strongly implied that it might be linked to corporate intimidation. The story caught fire, no pun intended, partly because the region's farmers had already been buzzing about Nate's irrigation breakthrough. Now, there was a human interest angle steeped in danger and mystery. Within a week, the county's agricultural community had rallied behind them. Even Bill Anderson, once a skeptic, organized an impromptu meeting at a nearby community center. Dozens of farmers showed up, some merely curious, others genuinely concerned about the potential for sabotage. Ava gave a brief presentation on how her sensor-driven system used 50 to 60% less water and had already revived part of Nate's withering corn crop. Nate noticed the looks of dawning excitement on faces he'd known for decades. Men and women who had once teased him for being too book-smart when he was younger or too stubbornly traditionalist now bombarded Ava with questions about cost, installation, and how soon they could replicate it. Yet the specter of the fire and Terragro's possible role loomed over every hopeful query. "We can't afford to just ignore them." One older farmer, Tammy, spoke up. "If that corporation is as ruthless as you say, then any one of us who adopts your system could be a target." The room muttered in agreement. Ava cleared her throat. "My hope is that by going public, TerraGrow will have to tread carefully. They don't want and they don't want a bunch of small farmers uniting against them. If enough of you sign on, we become a collective voice that's hard to silence." Nate glanced at Ava with pride. Despite the intimidation tactics, she stood tall, unwavering in her mission. He realized that a sort of kinship had grown between them, a bond formed under adversity. He was grateful for her tenacity, her willingness to stand up and fight for a more equitable future in agriculture. And if he was honest, he admired her on a personal level too, though he wasn't sure either of them had the time or emotional energy to entertain deeper feelings right now. Over the following days, they ironed out the basics of what would become an informal cooperative. Bill Anderson brought in a few local business owners who pledged small loans. Another neighbor offered his barn as a workshop to help with sensor assembly and drip line setup. Farmers who traditionally competed for market share suddenly found themselves united by a common enemy: drought, exploitation, and corporate intimidation. Meanwhile, Nate's farm was a beehive of activity. Ava enlisted a friend from her old university, an engineering grad student named Ethan O'Malley, to come help maintain the software and hardware. If TerraGrow tried to sabotage them electronically, Ethan would be their IT security. Nate's phone buzzed constantly with calls from anxious farmers, while Ava juggled meetings with reporters, local co-op boards, and potential investors. Despite the caring, the fields continued to improve. Every day, the sensor data showed stable moisture levels in the root zones. The plants were responding: greener leaves, stronger stalks. The sight of healthy crops became a powerful symbol for the community. If a near-bankrupt farmer like Nate could bounce back, maybe anyone could. Late one evening, Nate found himself alone in the barn, scanning the latest water usage charts. He realized that despite the terror and uncertainty, he felt more alive than he had in years. Purpose had returned to these old walls, and maybe, just maybe, this was the moment his family's legacy would rise from the brink of failure to become a beacon of innovation. With momentum building, TerraGrow made its next move in a predictable but no less alarming way. They filed a formal cease and desist letter, claiming Ava's system violated proprietary patents. A local attorney, sympathetic to the farmers, examined the documents and advised them to brace for a fight. "It might take months or even years," he said, flipping through the pages. "TerraGrow has money to burn on legal fees. They're probably hoping you'll run out of steam or finances." Ava went pale but refused to be cowed. "We'll counter. The concept was mine before I joined them. If they want to drag this to court, I'll present all my prototypes, notes, and even personal journal entries that predate TerraGrow's involvement." Nate looked at the attorney. "How much will that cost us?" The attorney's weary expression was enough of an answer. "Unless you find a pro bono lawyer or significant funding, it won't be cheap. But maybe there's a silver lining. If you win publicly, it'll be a major blow to TerraGrow's credibility." The weeks that followed were a strange mix of advancement and anxiety. On one hand, the cooperative grew stronger. Bill Anderson became a vocal advocate, convincing 5 more local farmers to adopt smaller versions of Ava's system. Ethan upgraded the software to handle multi-farm data, turning Nate's barn into a makeshift command center. On the other hand, legal notices piled up, each letter from TerraGrow's attorneys more threatening than the last. The constant stress took a toll. One evening, Nate found Ava hunched over her laptop, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. When he put a hand on her shoulder, she murmured, "I feel responsible if this all collapses. So many people are counting on me." He knelt down, meeting her gaze. "We're in this together. It's not just your fight anymore." A pang of protectiveness surged through him, an unfamiliar but not unwelcome feeling since losing Diana. In that shared moment, the entire barn seemed to pause. The hum of the sensor servers faded into the background, leaving just the hush of 2 people bound by a cause greater than themselves. He thought of leaning in, comforting her more intimately, but he wasn't sure if it was the right time. Ava gave a shaky smile and turned back to the screen. We can't stop. If we show the world we can boost yields, cut water use, and remain free from corporate strangulation, we'll have something too valuable to be dismissed. Their chance to make a big splash came sooner than expected. A state senator reached out, asking if they'd host a field demonstration for local politicians concerned about water shortages. If they impressed the senator, they might secure public funds for small-scale farmers to adopt the technology, undermining TerraGrow's grip. They mobilized quickly, setting up a designated demonstration plot on Nate's land, two lines of corn side by side, one irrigated by an outdated overhead system, the other by Ava's sensor-driven drip lines. The difference was stark. The overhead section looked anemic and wilted, while the sensor-driven plants stood vibrant and tall. On the appointed day, the senator arrived with a small entourage of county officials, journalists, and a few environmental scientists. Nate and Ava walked them through the farm, explaining how the data-driven approach optimized water usage. The senator listened attentively, scribbling notes. A local camera crew filmed the entire tour. By the end of the visit, the senator looked impressed, even excited. He turned to the cameras. I believe this is a prime example of how innovation can save our farms, he declared. I'll be recommending a pilot program to fund systems like this across our district. That evening, a celebratory air filled Nate's farmhouse. Yet the phone call they received right after the senator's endorsement threatened to shatter their newfound joy. Late into the night, the landline rang. Ava answered, her face tightening as she listened. By the time she hung up, Nate could see she was visibly shaken. That was a friend from my old university, she explained. She heard rumors that TerraGrow is preparing a motion for an injunction, something that would force us to shut down the system until the patent dispute is resolved. Nate felt like someone had punched him in the gut. But that could kill our crops, he said, voice dropping in anger. We're in mid-season. If we shut down irrigation, everything we've worked for goes up in smoke. Ava nodded. Exactly. That's probably their game plan: strangle us financially by halting the technology's use. Even if we eventually win in court, the damage would be done by then. She paced the living room, her mind clearly spinning with possible strategies. Ethan and Bill, who were both present, weighed in. We can keep the system running off the grid, Ethan suggested. Make it a closed loop with no external data transmissions. Harder to prove we're using it if it's not connected to the internet. Bill grunted in agreement. Go underground with it. Let these fancy lawyers chase shadows while you keep watering the fields. Ava slumped into a chair. That might buy time. But if a legal notice demands we stop, ignoring it outright could lead to contempt of court. Then we're in bigger trouble. Nate stared at the stack of papers from TerraGrow, each stamped with official seals. There must be a legal argument that our system is distinct, different enough that we're not infringing anything. We'll need more than argument, Ava replied grimly. We need money for a real legal defense, or we need public outcry so massive that TerraGrow backs off. She paused, looking at Nate. We could also consider letting them buy the rights. They'll pay a significant sum. You'd get out of debt. The farm would be safe, and maybe TerraGrow would. Absolutely not. Nate interjected before she could finish. I see what they do to small operations. They'll shelf your real tech, roll out a subpar version that costs a fortune, and we'll be right back under their thumb. He ran a frustrated hand through his hair. No, we stand our ground. A heavy silence followed. Ava's eyes shone with gratitude, but also fear. She knew what it meant for him to reject an easy bailout. Bill cleared his throat. We might have more allies than you think. The senator seemed real keen, and the local news has been featuring your story every other day. The conversation stretched into the early hours, brainstorming ways to harness public support, including a possible live stream or big press event where farmers across the county showcased their improved crops. They wanted to demonstrate that shutting down Ava's system wasn't just about one farm, it would impact an entire community. If enough voices demanded it, maybe the courts would hesitate to grant an injunction. That night, as exhaustion weighed on them, Ava and Nate were the last two awake in the farmhouse. Dim light from the kitchen lamp cast long shadows across the table where they pored over documents. Without warning, Ava reached for Nate's hand, giving it a firm, reassuring squeeze. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "We won't give up," she whispered. And in that moment, there was more than determination in her tone. There was a flicker of something warmer, a sense of closeness that transcended their shared struggle. Nate swallowed hard, nodding. "We fight." The next week became a whirlwind of activity. Nate, Ava, Bill, and Ethan organized what they dubbed the Harvest Hope Rally, inviting press, local politicians, and as many farmers as they could pack onto Nate's land. A hastily erected stage and a few chairs appeared in front of the flourishing cornfields. Banners read "Innovation for Family Farms" and "Sustainable Agriculture for Our Future." On the morning of the rally, the sky showed mercy with mild temperatures and a gentle breeze. Cars and trucks from all over the county and even beyond lined the dusty driveway. Reporters set up cameras, and community members milled about, sampling cornbread and iced tea offered by local vendors. The entire farm buzzed with a hopeful energy, as if everyone sensed this was a tipping point. At noon, Bill Anderson took the stage first, uncharacteristically wearing a pressed shirt. He cleared his throat, looking out over the crowd. "Folks, I never thought I'd be standing up here praising technology, but I've seen it with my own eyes. My buddy Nate's fields are greener than they've been in years. And it's thanks to Ava Mori's system." He nodded solemnly. "We stand at a crossroads. Either we let corporations dictate our futures, or we come together to save our way of life." A smattering of applause and cheers followed. Ava spoke next, explaining the mechanics of her drip irrigation sensors in straightforward language. She balanced the right amount of technical detail with heartfelt sincerity, sharing her backstory of how TerraGrow tried to bury her invention. The crowd's sympathy and outrage grew in equal measure. Finally, Nate stepped forward. His heart pounded. He wasn't used to public speaking, but necessity emboldened him. "I was on the verge of losing everything," he began, scanning the sea of faces. "Without Dr. Mori's technology, these fields would be dead. My father and grandfather worked this land before me, and I almost let them down. Now, because of this system, we have a chance, not just me, but all of us struggling against drought and corporate pressure." The applause this time was thunderous. A camera crew from a regional TV station filmed every word. Nate closed by highlighting how many local farms had already begun installing scaled-down versions of the system and how yields were improving across the board. "This isn't about one farm," he concluded. "It's about an entire community, an entire way of life." After the speeches, tours of the fields commenced. Farmers and journalists wandered among the towering corn stalks, snapping photos and taking notes. Ava demonstrated sensor data on her tablet, handing it to reporters so they could see the moisture readings for themselves. The atmosphere felt celebratory, almost defiant, like they were collectively drawing a line in the sand against TerraGrow. In the midst of the rally, the black SUV reappeared, lurking at the far end of the driveway. Nate tensed, spotting the same TerraGrow representatives who'd threatened them weeks earlier. They stood by their vehicle, arms folded, faces impassive, but they made no move to interrupt. Perhaps they realized any attempt at intimidation with cameras rolling would backfire spectacularly. Later, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, a local band played a few lively tunes on the makeshift stage, adding a festival-like vibe to the day's proceedings. Kids chased each other between the rows of parked cars, while older folks clapped along, some even dancing near the barn door. Nate found Ava near the sensor hub, quiet and contemplative. "This is good," she said, a tired smile on her face. "But TerraGrow won't give up easily. We still have that injunction hanging over us." Nate slipped a comforting arm around her shoulders, a gesture that felt both natural and significant. "Let them try. Today we showed them we're not alone. If they come after us, they come after everyone here, and that's a bigger fight than they bargained for." Ava rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time, Nate allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just about saving the farm, but building a new life, one where heartbreak no longer defined him. The injunction paperwork arrived just 3 days after the rally, but by then, the entire county seemed to have rallied around Nate and Ava. Local newspapers condemned Terragro's tactic as corporate bullying, and the state senator who had previously toured the farm issued a public statement supporting the Hayes operation and calling for an investigation into potential anti-competitive practices. More than that, the video footage of the Harvest Hope rally circulated widely online, garnering thousands of views and messages of solidarity from small farming communities across the state. All this publicity put Terragro in a precarious position. They'd planned to quietly strangle Ava's invention before it could gain traction, but the widespread attention made that impossible. Their legal team still pressed for a hearing to shut down the system, but even the judge assigned to the case expressed skepticism about harming an already vulnerable farm. In a strategic retreat, Terragro's lawyers floated the idea of a settlement, seeking to buy the patent outright with a multi-million-dollar offer. It sounded tempting on paper. Nate's debts would vanish. Ava would be wealthy, and they could theoretically walk away from the fight. But neither of them was interested in walking away. On the day of the preliminary hearing, they arrived at the courthouse surrounded by local supporters, farmers, community leaders, and even a few protesters carried signs urging justice and innovation. The hearing itself turned into a dramatic showdown, with Ava's attorney presenting early prototypes, diaries of her research, and a timeline that predated any Terragro claims. The judge, unimpressed by Terragro's vague accusations, refused to grant the immediate injunction. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Nate and Ava emerged. That moment felt triumphant. Though both knew the legal battles might continue in various forms, yet the victory signaled a turning point, a recognition that Terragro no longer had free rein to crush opposition. In the weeks that followed, farmers across the region clamored to join the cooperative that had spontaneously formed around Ava's system. Bill Anderson's barn became a second hub for sensor installation, thanks to the funding from local sponsors who saw a future in sustainable agriculture. Town halls turned into community gatherings where best practices were shared, from software calibration to soil regeneration techniques. As for Nate, he found himself in a role he'd never expected: a teacher, a guide for those adopting the technology. He stood in fields, demonstrating how to check the sensor readouts and control the drip lines, all while forging new friendships and alliances. He frequently caught Ava's eye, a subtle warmth passing between them that hinted at more than professional respect. They hadn't labeled it yet, both were too preoccupied with the monumental task at hand, but it was there, steady and real. One late afternoon, Jamie, Nate's daughter, pulled into the driveway unannounced. She was on break from college and had rushed back after seeing news segments featuring her father's farm. Nate greeted her with open arms, a swirl of pride and relief as she stood gaping at the sea of green crops. In the barn, she met Ava for the first time, the two bonding over their love of science and problem solving. Nate watched them chat animatedly, his heart full at the thought that maybe he wasn't failing as a father after all. That night, a spontaneous celebration broke out under the stars. Locals arrived with homemade pies and casseroles, setting out folding tables by the barn. Laughter mingled with the sound of country music drifting from a battery-powered speaker. And as Nate wandered through the crowd, offering drinks and trading stories, he realized the farm felt alive again, vibrant in a way it hadn't since Diana's passing. The final push toward harvest season lay ahead, and there would be many more obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, the future felt like a promise rather than a threat. Ava found him near the barn door, gazing out at the fields softly lit by the moon. She slipped her hand into his. No words were needed. They stood together, breathing in the night air, as fireflies blinked amidst the rows of corn. Here, on this soil that had once threatened to crumble beneath him, Nate Hayes had found a new beginning, and that he would share with a woman who had brought hope in the guise of technology, and with a community determined to keep its heartland thriving for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't just about a farm or the soil beneath it, but about the quiet courage to stand firm when all seemed lost. The battle cost dearly: dreams charred to ashes, friendships tested by fire, innocence exchanged for wisdom earned the hard way. Yet, amid the struggle, something extraordinary took root, a bond born from adversity, a community rediscovering its strength, and two souls finding unexpected comfort in each other. The fields once ravaged by drought and deception now flourish again, proof that even the harshest seasons can yield abundance when nurtured by truth and resilience. Still, scars remain silent reminders that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt but never without a price. Looking back, perhaps the greatest harvest was not in crops restored or technology embraced, but in the realization that every ending is also a beginning. The land endures, as does the human spirit, ever ready to rise from ruin. And now, as twilight settles gently over fields renewed, one question remains when faced with impossible odds. What would you risk to protect the legacy you love?